on mysticism and logic, really, one of my favorite philosophers, teacher of Wittgenstein, he will argue here from a scientific philosophical perspective. There will be points where I disagree, where I will get into a discussion with Bernard. Ultimately, this is not about winning an argument. I really wanted to make this response video for a very long time. Let's get into it.
Mysticism. Ought we to admit that there is available, in support of religion, a source of knowledge which lies outside science and may properly be described as revelation?
Yeah, here are immediately two things that I would like to correct by now, but at his time, the way how mysticism is and was defined, it was always as a religious practice in some sort of form. And this is as well something where Wikipedia is wrong today, and I will make another video how Wikipedia is wrong on mysticism. But first of all, no, it's not about a religious practice, and it's not about a revelation, not only. Right? We have mysticism definitely practiced within religion, but mysticism itself doesn't need any religion. Going back again to my favorite sages of the ancient times, Lao Tzu, Zhangsa, yes, from Bernard's timeline perspective, they would be called Taoists, but they were no Taoists. Religious sciences call them proto-Taoist because there was no Taoist religion at the moment when they wrote their work. Taoism came into play in 1st century AD as a creation that used their materials to build a religion. But if you read Zhang Za's work, if you read the Tao Te Ching, you really cannot argue that that's a religious text, not to me at least. Obviously, we need to understand that even Tao Te Ching is a compilation and some things have been added later, but in its core, it's metaphysical. So it's a metaphysical philosophy rather than any form of religious text. So here is the first point where I need to disagree with Bernard and understand why he's saying it. Because religious sciences, at the moment where he made this speech, haven't been so far to actually deconstruct this. There, as an agnostic mystic, even more, I argue that mysticism does not need any boundary to any religion. And like Alan Watts famously said, on enlightenment, sudden enlightenments happens, even to people who don't pursue it and who are not religious at all. So how would we argue? So Bernard, understand it, but I wouldn't say it's a religion, and not all mystical texts pursue to be a revelation. They are more an inspiration. And we come to the point later. Let's get into it.
This is a difficult question to argue, because those who believe that truths have been revealed to them profess the same kind of certainty in regard to them that we have in regard to objects of sense. We believe the person who has seen things through the telescope that we have never seen. Why then, they ask, should we not believe them when they report things that are to them equally unquestioned?
Okay. Again, I need to respond. Right? But first of all, this is one of the problems that the mystics have created for themselves. I must agree with Bernard here. If you come in and say my mystical experience is objective, that means it's something that someone else can experience, which obviously mystical experiences can be experienced by several people. But then comes the problem. Saying that the one experienced by one person can identically be experienced by another person, I would have an issue with that, because ultimately the experience is subjective. And even though there are common denominators in those experiences, as the texts will show us, it is not objective in a scientific sense. I can point my telescope at Pluto, which we cannot see with our naked eye, and say, yes, The object of the skies is in there, and everyone who will have a strong enough telescope can see it and can prove it. This is not how mysticism even can work. And here is Bernard right. The cause of the problem is that the mystical experience happens on a very primordial level that precedes thinking, that precedes language, that even precedes arts. So the experience itself, if translated then into an expression that a human can understand, which is language or art, will always be only a fraction and therefore misleading than something completely different when I take a picture of Saturn and put it in front of you, or when I take a mathematical equation, which can be proven. So, is this of the mystics making? Yes. Let's go further.
It is perhaps useless to attempt an argument such as will appeal to the person who has enjoyed mystical illumination. But something can be said as to whether we others should accept this testimony. In the first place, it is not subject to the ordinary tests.
No, we shouldn't take his testimony, right? A king will not go and say, I am a king. A mystic, from my perspective, shouldn't pursue anyone about his enlightenment. Come on, why would enlightened people go say, I am enlightened? I mean, that's ridiculous. Yeah, sure. You cannot see it at the person, right? One will walk on the streets, and if you pass an enlightened person, you will not go around and see some light, a halo around the head. No, there is no need. Why would an enlightened person have the urge or desire to convince anybody about his enlightenment? Makes no sense. Okay, let's continue.
When a person of science tells us the result of an experiment, he also tells us how the experiment was performed. Others can repeat it.
Yes, peer review, right? That's the foundation of sciences, created in this ancient text of an Arabic optical um, doctor at the time, basically. Wrote the text, said what he observed, and the method how he came to it. This is how sciences, what the scientific method is about. You perform an observation under certain conditions, you repeat it, see the same, you let others to take your method and to confirm the results. Now here you see the problem, because what we do with our observations and sciences is aimed to be an objective, quantifiable, measurable, describable, as precise as possibly phenomena. While mystics, the mystical experience in itself is undescribable. You cannot describe it. And therefore, the ancient text really starts with my favorite sentence about Tao. The Tao that can be spoken of is not the true Tao. So this ancient sages, this great masters of mysticism, they understood and they started talking about something that actually cannot be talked about. And the purpose is not to be descriptive in this modern scientific way, but to put an inspiration to everyone to pursue it on his own individual way, and then to experience something which is universal but individually and subjectively experienced, right? So yeah, let's continue here.
And if the result is not confirmed, it is not accepted as true. But many people might put themselves into the situation in which the mystic's vision occurred without obtaining the same revelation. To this it may be answered that a person must use the appropriate sense. A telescope is useless to a person who keeps his eyes shut. The argument as to the credibility of the mystic's testimony may be prolonged almost indefinitely. Science should be neutral. Since the argument is a scientific one, to be conducted exactly as an argument would be conducted about an uncertain experiment. Science depends upon perception and inference. Its credibility is due to the fact that the perceptions are such as any observer can test.
Right, again, right. This is the scientific method. And again, the root cause here, from my perspective, is really with some of the mystics that have elevated their mystical experiences, if any, into something, first of all, objective and maybe even superior. They're basically saying it is a form of knowledge. It is it is an experience that will deeply change you, but I wouldn't call it knowledge. Uh, if you go into the definition of philosophy, and I have another video on that part, right? If you translate philosophy as love to knowledge, then it's a misleading translation, because knowledge is transferable. Knowledge is 1 plus 1 is 2. That is something that you can teach. Philosophy is love for wisdom, and wisdom is not something that you can transfer. You can transfer the openness and some methods how to pursue wisdom. So the mystical experience itself is arguably objective in a form that it's attainable. It's subjective in a form how it is experienced. And I even argue that there is no guaranteed method to the mystical experience, to what one would say enlightenment. And therefore, it cannot be scientifically valued from this perspective. You take two people, you give them the same meditations, you let them do the same things, the result will be different. I'm absolutely certain about it. Okay, let's continue.
The mystic himself may be certain that he knows, but those who are asked to accept his testimony will subject it to scientific tests.
Yeah, so first of all, the mystic will be certain not that he knows, but that he experienced. And he will be aware that translating this experience into language, which is what happens if you experience something. Let me give you a very specific example of primordial experiences. If you will be scared to death, you freeze, stop breathing, you have a feeling your heart stop. You are in a moment that you experience that will utterly consume you. If the moment passes, it was just a cat outside, not a killer in your house. What happens? You go and try to explain it to someone? You will be very limited in explaining it, and whatever you try to say about the situation you've been in, it will absolutely not touch the horrors that you have felt. There's a huge difference between absolutely deeply experiencing something with your whole being and the ability to translate it into language so you could tell it to someone and the someone would understand it and have the same identical feeling that you. That's just not possible. The rational and language is a very imperfect tool for that. It's just not working. And here is the limitation, and here are the issues. And that's as well the reason why trying to convince someone of a mystical experiences is a fool's errand. And therefore, the great sages turned into paradoxes, turned into poetry. And therefore, they even stated that, if they are talking about it, then they are basically not hitting it. They are not being able to describe it. It will always slip through our fingers.
Science, as such, should have no expectation, positive or negative, as to the result. The chief argument in favor of the mystics is their agreement with each other.
Yes, so I'm not saying that the mystics agree on their experience perception, right? Because that would basically mean that a fanatically religious mystic would agree with a sort of, for example, Buddhist or Taoist, which may not be seen as a religious. Right? So I would say what the agreement is on is the attainability, is that the mystical experience is genuinely human, happens through the history of humankind, and is attainable. I would say this is where the agreement is. I wouldn't go that far to say that what the experience is, or in Bernard's words reveals, is identical. I think that that's a misleading direction that again maybe comes from the mystics themselves.
But it is important not to caricature the doctrine of mysticism, in which there is, I think, a core of wisdom.
Yes. So if we talk about wisdom as something that is not transferable but attainable, then yes.
I believe that when the mystics contrast reality with appearance, the word reality has not a logical, but an emotional significance. It means what is, in some sense, important. When it is said that time is unreal, what should be said is that, in some sense and on some occasions, it is important to conceive the universe as a whole, as the Creator, if he existed, must have conceived it in deciding to create it. When so conceived, all process is within one completed whole.
Yeah, that's the oneness. Yeah. And that's the difference between perception and, I mean, experience, because experience comes before perception, in a sense, the deep experience. Why you could argue you see something in a new experience, but it can go from the inner. If we are talking about the inner, then experience perceives perception. Right? But don't forget that the time when Bernard made this speech, there was a strong focus on objectivity of reality. Right? We know better. We today talk about the universe that we are not certain how it even is built. We are not certain how old it really is. Yes, you have the Big Bang theory, wonderful, but against that you have the theory of the universe as a hologram. So we are a bit further here in keeping a bit more reserved perception on objectivity. Don't forget, Bernard is a master of logic.
Past, present, and future all exist, in some sense, together. And the present does not have that preeminent reality which it has to our usual ways of apprehending the world. If this interpretation is accepted, mysticism expresses an emotion, not a fact.
Yes. Yeah, I must agree. Um I wouldn't say that mystical experience is a fact or factual. It is an experience. It is closer to art than to objective sciences. Yes, Bernard, agree.
It does not assert anything, and therefore can be neither confirmed nor contradicted by science.
Valid point. And I don't think that mystics should actually pursue confirmation by science. Nor should they dispute science, or should they ignore science. There are two parallel ways. The way of artistic expression and feeling is not better or more valuable than rational calculation and objective approaches. You cannot say that Shakespeare is more important or better than Newton, and you cannot say it the other way around. If you are open-minded, you are able to work with both and be happy that both existed and gave us what they gave us.
The fact that mystics do make assertions is owing to their inability to separate emotional importance from scientific validity.
Yes, yes. Like I said, I don't think mystics should really go this path. You will not win a scientific argument against science from a mystical perspective.
This certain and partial unanimity of mystics is no conclusive reason for accepting their testimony on a matter of fact. The scientist, when he wishes others to see what he has seen, arranges his microscope or telescope. That is to say, he makes changes in the external world, but demands of the observer only normal eyesight. The mystic, on the other hand, demands changes in the observer, by fasting, by breathing exercises, and by a careful abstention from external observation.
He again works here with the approaches that are limited to mostly religious and traditional methods. Because that's what tradition teaches you, because tradition wants to have your method for you. So what they tell you is to influence the senses, and in more religious sentences you in more spiritual ones you use meditation, as if anything of that would put a guarantee on your mystical and enlightened experience. And I know it's not. And therefore I understand the point here. Where Bernard is again right is that the change happens within the human, and therefore it is subjective to an objective scientist.
We all know that opium, hashish, and alcohol produce certain effects on the observer. But as we do not think these effects admirable, we take no account of them in our theory of the universe. They may even sometimes reveal fragments of truth. But we do not regard them as sources of general wisdom. The drunkard who sees snakes does not imagine afterwards that he has had a revelation of a reality hidden from others. From a scientific point of view, we can make no distinction between the person who eats little and sees heaven, and the man who drinks much and sees snakes.
This is a wonderful argument. That is great. Yeah, he's right. I will not argue with him, right? Well, that's the problem, right? How would you distinguish a delusional maniac from an enlightened person? You look around the sects and gurus that have been proven, right? They're absolutely delusional, and they gathered a huge following doing sometimes really horrific things. Yeah, there is no objective way of telling enlightenment from delusion. That's where Bernard is absolutely right. That this argument is correct, and it's why an enlightened person will not walk around and say, "Hey, I'm enlightened." Because that's first of all, there is no need for that. If you experience the unity of being, the perception of the universe itself, of everything is a different, and the perception of yourself is completely different. I would even say you are no longer human, in a sense that you break out of the human boundaries. And then why would you go around and try to convince fellow humans that you are something else, that you experience something? What you could do is you start to write some art, or you maybe do something where you try to inspire others maybe to pursue, if it resonates within their being, put them on a path. But you will not go and tell them to walk a path. Makes no sense. So yeah, Bernard is spot on. I must agree. Great.
Each is in an abnormal physical condition, and therefore has abnormal perceptions. Normal perceptions, since they have to be useful in the struggle for life, must have some correspondence with fact. But in abnormal perceptions there is no reason to expect such correspondence, and their testimony, therefore, cannot outweigh that of normal perception. The mystic emotion, if it is freed from unwarranted beliefs, and so overwhelming as to remove a person wholly from the ordinary business of life, may give something of very great value, the same kind of thing, though in a heightened form, that is given by contemplation. Breadth and calm and profundity may all have their source in this emotion, in which for the moment all self-centered desire is dead, and the mind becomes a mirror for the vastness of the universe.
This is beautiful. The mind becomes a mirror for the vastness of the universe. I love it. This is beautiful. Yeah.
Those who have had this experience and believe it to be bound up unavoidably with assertions about the nature of the universe naturally cling to these assertions. I believe myself that there is no reason to believe them true. I cannot admit any method of arriving at truth except that of science.
Again, here is the logic man speaking. The first point that we would need to talk about is truth itself. What is truth? What makes truth true? And there's a whole construct around it. And I could go on for hours, and I would need to bring more and more philosophers into this. So Bernard's position is very clear. Science owns the truth because you can independently, through the same method, confirm something or find out that it's not working. This is not happening in the individual level, in the individual experiences. So his approach is purely scientific in this science owns the truth way, which I'm not criticizing. Right? I admire this man, and you see the logic, the arguments that he builds. And like I said in the beginning, I'm not trying to win an argument here with him. I definitely wouldn't be able to beat him in a discussion, and I wouldn't want to. I would love to be in a discussion with him, but I wouldn't care to win the argument. Okay, let's go on for the last sentence.
But in the realm of the emotions, I do not deny the value of the experiences which have given rise to religion. Through association with false beliefs, they have led to much evil as well as good. Freed from this association, it may be hoped that the good alone will remain.
Wonderfully spoken. Wonderfully spoken. First of all, going back to the proto-Taoist and all the sages, if we, as we know today, Buddha didn't wrote the Tripitaka, Muhammad didn't wrote the Quran, the apostles or Jesus haven't written the New Testament, the Gospels. We know it today. It's archaeologically, scientifically proven. So religions came into play and into place after the mystics, after the sages had their experiences and expressed them. It were not the sages creating the religion. And like he says, religion has created so much evil, and I argue that's because religion asks you to believe, and belief is an acceptance of a dogma, an acceptance of an ideology that you manifest with obedience. And if someone asks you for obedience, what is that? But if you take all of this away, if you take the religious, the dogmatic, the ideological part away, you are left with the essential paradoxal poetic expressions of the sages. And there is no evil in that, because they are not telling you what to do and how to live your life. They will just give you a paradoxical sentence that should inspire your thinking. That could polish the mirror in which the universe is reflected. And what you do with that is this is up to you. So, Bernard, thank you very much for recording this speech those many decades ago.